So welcome. Thanks everybody for coming. I know the Democratic debates are going on right now, so thanks for taking the time. So my name is Stryder Rodenberg. I'm a current senior here, for those of you who don't know. And so as seniors, we do a senior internship. And I chose to do mine with the Pima County Health Department. And he's kind of my guide, my mentor there, so thank you. And I chose mine specifically on how to help deal with the vaping crisis. So part of that is advocating for policy, and part of that is through education, which I'm going to do tonight. I'm doing to middle school and hopefully to the high school as well later this year. So welcome to my presentation, The Life of a Kid. So first we'll play a quick Kahoot. Philip, if you can click on the link. So I know usually you don't use phones, but if everybody can take out their phone really quickly. And you go to the website kahoot.it on your phone. And if you don't want it, that's all good. And it'll prompt you to enter that little game pin, and it's 689950.
I got this
and you'll just choose one.
I've been here for like 2 years now. Oh, I'm gonna do the Kahoot. Alright. I think I'm probably gonna know all the answers by now. I'm doing the Kahoot.
And so the way this works, it's kind of like a trivia-based game, and it'll questions pop up, and there will be a color and a shape on the screen with the corresponding answer. Then you'll click that corresponding shape or the color on the phone to which answer you think it is.
Inappropriate name. Except for blah.
Alright, where's my picture? J. I want it to be young Phil, but I'm gonna just do Phil. I should just be open.
Everybody get it? Perfect. All right, we can start it then, Philip.
You need a hand? I just went to the website again.
Okay, so the first question is, can an individual become a drug addict
No.
because of past troubles and not because of a powerful drug? Yes, drug addictions are often driven by traumatic experiences, or no, drug use is always driven by powerful chemical hooks found in drugs. So I think it's yes, or click the red triangle on your phone. I think it's no, you'll click the blue.
But that's also true. Both of them are true. I did.
Okay, so that's good. It is true. Drug addictions are often driven by traumatic experiences.
Hey, young Phil.
Alright, so the next question. How many high school shootings have occurred since Columbine in 1999?
Let's see.
230, 101, 17, or 533.
It's like 101, maybe. Actually, I don't think it's 533.
Okay, so it's a little mixed around. Remembering that traumatic experiences often are a factor in addiction, that's an important statistic to remember. And so here's a true or false one. Childhood trauma is just as likely to cause drug addiction as obesity is to cause heart disease. So that is true, and it kind of changes the way we should look about addiction, and I'll get into details and stuff like that later. True or false, running for 15 minutes a day or walking for an hour reduces the risk of major depression by 26%.
Actually,
So that is true. And then the next one is True or false? Another one. Kids who see tobacco marketing are 64% more likely to start smoking. So that is true. Another important statistic which I'll dive into later. A couple more questions. How much money was spent in Arizona on tobacco marketing last year? And this is in 2016. Either 47.5 million, 113.5 million, 89.6 million, or 145.2 million. Yeah, so just in 2016 alone, tobacco companies spent almost $114 million in Arizona.
Smoking.
At what percentage did the national high school vaping rate increase just last year? So from 2018 to 2019, 29%,
Where did that come
78%, 52%, 66%.
What happened? Something like these up. Okay.
So most of you got it. It did increase 78% just last
That was
year.
rough.
Now, even more alarmingly,
There's nothing. No
at what percentage did the national middle school vaping rate increase last year? 19%, 32%, 45%, or
It sounds a lot better
60%.
now. I don't know what happened.
Okay. So it's not quite as high, but still, if you're thinking about middle school, it's a really high percentage. And then a couple more questions.
Why?
What is this? So a picture will come up and then you click on what you think it is. So is this a mini boom, a Bluetooth speaker, Wi-Fi on the go-go, which is a portable Wi-Fi stick, a USB flash drive, or is it a Juul, which is a type of PC? Okay, so you guys all know what a Juul is. That's good. And then, so now we'll look at the next picture and you have to think what it is. Is it a Pax Era, which is marijuana, Enjoy, which is nicotine salt, a Juul is another picture of a Juul, or is it a picture of a Stizzy, which dispenses marijuana? Yeah, so that actually dispenses marijuana. As you can tell, it looks just like a Juul does. It's the same size, they don't smell, yet you can vape marijuana, just the same way you can vape nicotine. So I think we have one more question. Yep. And so what are some consequences of teenage nicotine use? For many, e-cigarettes and nicotine is a gateway drug. Teen smokers are twice as likely to become lifelong smokers. Popcorn lung and yellow decayed teeth or impaired development of the prefrontal cortex.
I just learned it. I just smoked all of y'all. I don't know anything about
Yeah,
that.
so they're all consequences of teenage nicotine use, and so that was just kind of introduce us to the topic and kind of get us settled in. So now we'll start with the presentation itself.
Yeah.
And so congratulations to Phil.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Third grade.
So if we can go back to the presentation.
Yep, I'm getting there.
Yeah, so the first question we're going to talk about is how does addiction work? Because often driven by media, we kind of have this preconception of how addiction works and how addictions are developed.
5 stars.
And I'm going to kind of try to tell you that that's completely wrong. Addictions are actually driven by different factors than the drugs, right? So the first misconception we're going to talk about is physical dependence versus addiction. And physical dependence occurs when an individual is physically relying on a substance or action to the point that they will experience physical withdrawal symptoms, right? And that's compared to addiction, which is the psychological reliance on a substance or action to numb you, to excite you, whatever that drug or action does for you.
I still kind of hear it.
So to kind of explain this, we'll use the example of coffee, which is a drug. I'm not saying it's a bad drug, don't drink coffee. But I'm just going to use it as the example. So say you drink coffee and then you forget one morning to drink a cup of coffee. So if by lunchtime you're getting that really bad caffeine headache, that would mean that you're physically dependent on the coffee. However, if you go to work and then you can't focus, you're not alert, you're falling asleep, That would mean you're addicted to the coffee because you're relying on it to be reliant, to be awake, to be present. So if that makes sense, kind of to distinguish the difference between physical dependence and addiction. All right, so now we get into the pharmaceutical theory of addiction, which says that when someone consumes a drug, it changes the brain chemistry in their brain, right? It changes how it works, and then you're reliant on it. You build up tolerances, and you continually more and more and more of a drug until you die, you overdose, or you move to a harder drug. And I'm going to tell you that's kind of how we think of addiction and how addictions occur, but that is actually not true. And it can be disproved with three pretty concrete ideas. So the first is the nicotine patch. Does anybody have an idea of how successful nicotine patches are? Just a guess. 10%. Say that again? 10%. 10%? So pretty close. They're only 17% effective, right? And so remember, pharmaceutical theory of addiction would say that that should be 100% success rate, right? Because you're slowly ridding yourself of the brain chemistry, you're getting rid of the nicotine in your body, and that's the only thing driving addiction. But since only 17% of nicotine patches, or people that use nicotine patches are able to quit, that would mean the pharmaceutical theory of addiction could not be true. Another easy example is gambling, right? There's no physical hook in gambling the way there is in drugs. Yet over 10 million people in the U.S. have some sort of a gambling issue. So that also directly disproves the pharmaceutical theory of addiction. So moving on, I'm going to introduce four, what I'm going to call the true drivers of addiction. So the first one is the environment. So if you can click on that there.
Because the gate always screws up.
And keeping environment in mind, if you can notice anything or feel if something's off in this experiment.
Drug is so addictive, 9 out of 10 laboratory rats will use it. And use it. And use it. Until dead. It's called cocaine, and it can do the same thing to you.
Yeah, so does anybody notice anything off in this experiment, or maybe a reason why 9 out of 10 rats that were in that cage did overdose?
There was no other food there.
Exactly, right? So there's nothing to do besides the drug. So of course, if you're isolated, you're just by yourself, of course you're going to then turn to a drug because there's nothing else to do, there's nobody else to connect with, to bond with. And so Bruce Alexander, a psychiatrist from Canada, came along and he noticed the same thing, right? And he said, well, what if we changed the experiment? We had 2 cages side by side, and we had one they mimicked the same experiment, right, with the isolated rat, but in the other, they created a rat heaven, right? They called it Rat Park. And as you can see on the picture, they painted the walls, they gave food for the rats to have, they gave them toys, other rats to hang out with, other rats to have sex with. It was basically a heaven for rats, right? They could do whatever they wanted. And he wanted to know, would there be a difference in addiction rates? And so it turns out there is, right? In the isolated cage, rats use up to 25 milligrams of morphine per day, compared to the rat heaven, where rats use less than 5, right? So in terms of overcoming addiction, an environment can play a huge part in that. They also said, okay, this is great for preventing addiction, but what if a rat is already addicted to a drug? What if someone's already addicted to a drug? Can a change in environment then help that person with their addiction? So they tried that too, and they fed rats for 57 days, they fed them morphine. So a rat is as hooked on morphine as you're going to get. They then put those rats into Rat Park, and they noticed that within 1 week, almost all the rats completely stopped using morphine, right? And so this really does show that the environment plays a part in addiction. To kind of sum that up, here's a fabulous quote from Bruce Alexander himself. It says, addiction isn't a disease. Addiction is an adaptation. It's not you, it's the environment you live in. So moving on to the second driver of addiction is isolation. So again, a loss of personal connection and a loss of bonds. So this isn't quite as concrete as the way an environment is defined addiction. But basically what it's saying is that if you have no other humans to connect with, no other bonds, no other connections, you're going to turn to another source to find that connection. And in most cases, the natural reaction for humans is drugs. So to kind of prove that example, we'll use someone, just say 2008, right, and the economy has just crashed. That would mean that person is now, they get fired, they have no job, no income, they've lost their connection to society, they have no identity, right? And so naturally they're struggling, they're suffering, it's a hard time for them and their family. And so then they, just like other people, they develop a cough, they go to the pharmacy, they get morphine, because that's what you get prescribed if you have a cough. And so then they're going to be relying on that morphine to soothe their physical pain from the cough, but also their mental pain and their mental pain from losing their job, from losing their connection, their loss to society. And then when that prescription runs out, they'll still be reliant on it to soothe their emotional pain, even when their physical pain has decreased. So that makes sense for everybody as well. And so another quote is even saying, nothing is addictive in and of itself. It's always a combination of a potentially addictive substance or behavior and a susceptible individual. So the question we need to start asking is, what creates the susceptibility? And when we look at the vaping crisis specifically, that's going to be a key question. So the third factor is childhood trauma. Remember that childhood trauma is just as likely to cause drug addiction as obesity is to cause heart disease, right? So to use this, I'll refer to the adverse child experiences studies. And they looked at 10 horrible different things that can happen to a kid. As you can see, they're all listed here, right? Physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, domestic violence, crime or imprisoned family, suicide or death, mental illness, or parental substance abuse. And they wouldn't know what were the long-term effects of people suffering for what they call an ACE. And so they found that 2/3 of injection drug use is a product of 2/3 of injection drug users have suffered from at least one ACE, and that for every ACE that happens to someone, they are 2 to 4 times as susceptible to addiction. And remember, when we're looking at what creates a susceptibility, childhood trauma is a huge factor in creating susceptibility. What we conclude from this is addiction is a deeply ingrained response to stress, an attempt to cope with it through self-soothing. Maladaptive in the long term, it is highly effective in the short term, right? It serves as an escape. You can escape your situation, your bad living environment, whatever that stress is, you can escape it for a little bit. The fourth driver of addiction is lack of support and unjust policy.
Sorry.
No worries. And so this doesn't result in necessarily one person becoming addicted, but what it allows for is an entire demographic of people, or a lot of youth, in this case, to become addicted. So I'll just use one simple example, and that's the smoking rates of marijuana between the U.S. and Netherlands, right? So Netherlands is legal and it's regulated, right? It's on the market, it's an open market. If I were to tell you, so that 21% of Dutch teens reported having tried marijuana at least once. Anybody have an idea what that statistic is in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Just any guess. Where in the majority of the states, weed is not.
Sounds better. I say it sounds a little better. Just not like perfect, but.
Any idea? 80?
Sounds good.
So close. It's, I believe, 45%. Yeah, 45%, right? So changing policy can have a drastic effect, and bad policy can result in a lot of people becoming addicted and experimenting with drugs. So now that we kind of understand the 4 true drivers of addiction, the question becomes, okay, so we know how addiction works, but why is there a vaping crisis? So we'll look at what has allowed us as youth to become susceptible to vapes. Yes?
I'm sorry, you said in the questions earlier that it had gone up, middle school vaping had gone up to 45% or something.
Yeah.
But that could happen if 2 people became, if one person became 3 or something, right? I mean, that would be a 300. So
Yeah.
I have no idea when we say it's a crisis, whether we're talking about 500 kids or like 50% of the middle school population.
Yeah, great question. And so I think by the end of this year, there will be about 850,000 middle schoolers vaping in America, which is a really lot. And if you look at the high school number, that's 3 million, and by the end of this year, it will probably be close to 5 million high schoolers across America vaping. So now I'm going to call it our toxic situation, and I'm going to apply the 4 true drivers of addiction to our situation. So first of all, let's look at our environment, right? To talk about one stress, let's just talk about college. So in the last years, college acceptance rates have been steadily decreasing, right? For many competitive colleges, the acceptance rate is less than 10%. Meanwhile, college tuition is going straight up. So it's kind of that parity is huge, and it's also a lot of societal pressure, and a lot of times for people, pressure from their family to go to an elite school. The only way you're going to be happy, the only way you're going to be successful is by going to an elite school, and this just isn't true. So for a lot of us, that extreme pressure results in addiction. Let's also face it, we're living in a world with a lot of problems. To name a few, it's up to us, it's our generation. We're going to be the ones dealing with climate change, with laws preventing fundamental women's rights, the growing demographics of the alt-right, white nationalism, gun violence, widespread terrorism is on the rise. And so if we think about our environment, overall it's really, really stressful, and that's one of the key drivers of addiction. Now let's talk about our isolation. So we as youth, I'm going to say, are living in an isolated cage, not that happy and healthy environment, right? If you think back to that part. So if anybody watches The Big Bang Theory, I chose this kind of interaction between Sheldon and Penny. When Sheldon goes, "You don't think I can achieve the required intimacy via text messaging?" Penny goes, "Probably not." And he goes, "It would appear the phone companies have been lying to me." And unfortunately, our generation, we're not all Sheldons. We haven't come to this conclusion, right? We're still falling for that trap that we think one Instagram friend is representative of an actual friend, right? That Snapchat streak, which is the social media there, represents other friends. And so social media really has been shown to increase anxiety, increase depression, decrease self-esteem, decrease self-confidence, decrease motivation. So in a time when we really are looking for friends, all it's doing is trapping us in a cycle where we think we have friends, but it's really making us more lonely, and that kind of cycle continues. And then remember how key isolation is in driving addiction. So the third factor is our trauma. And if we remember that for each traumatic event, a child is 2 to 4 times as likely to become a drug addict, right? And so if we think about our collective traumas as a whole, as a generation of youth, we're the first generation of 9/11, which people often forget. Acts of terrorism, as I said earlier, are on the rise. Remember now that 230 high school shootings have occurred since Columbine. And in 2019, there's been more mass shootings than there have been days, right? So that's just our collective traumas, and these aren't traumatizing just for the people that were there, that experienced the shooting, but for us that weren't, wondering if maybe is our school going to be the next one to get shot, as depicted in the cartoon here, right? And then when someone does offer us a vape, we're easy to say they taste like candy, we don't really think it's that bad. Right? So that's just our collective traumas as a whole and as a generation. And then if you tack on our individual traumas, so to name a few, 40 to 50% of marriages end in divorce, right? And remember that was one of the traumatic drivers, right? So then those kids aren't just 2 to 4 times as likely to become a drug addict, they're 4 to 8 times as susceptible to addiction, right? Then if you look at sexual harassment, 1 in 3 women are sexually harassed in their lifetime, and 1 in 4 men are sexually harassed in their lifetime. And so again, not just for that 33%, 25% is this stressful, but for us that aren't or haven't been, just wondering even is a huge stress. And so we are super vulnerable and we're super susceptible. So when you combine our huge, our toxic situation, right? Oh, and the last one is leftist support. So first of all, not a single vaping device is FDA approved. We don't really know what is in them 100%. They're super easy to access. They're everywhere. You're supposed to be 18 to buy them, but they're everywhere. Someone just goes and buys a whole bunch and passes them out. And there's really no real education on the dangers of vaping in schools. We're working together. I'm working with Ms. Pat and Ms. Babbitt to help that at our school. But overall, as a generation, we're really not educated on these dangers. There's also no support from the government quite yet. We're working there. But overall, we're on our own against the big tobacco companies. So when you combine our toxic situation with intense marketing from tobacco companies, Right, so remember that in 2016, tobacco companies spent $113.5 million in Arizona alone. Because we're so susceptible, they know we're that susceptible, they know we're that vulnerable, we're easy targets. So then they do things like high-level ads, right? So remember that 64% increase, and so they pay for that space behind the counter. They pay for that space by the window, right next to the candy again. Jewel, candy, Jewel, candy, candy, Jewel, right? They're kind of thinking, oh, it can't be that bad. It even tastes like candy, so a lot of us think that it's candy. And it's also now cool to smoke. It has been cool to smoke before, but it's never quite been this cool, I make the case. And just the fact that they're everywhere, easy to access, and you can hide, right? You can vape in school, you can vape in the bathroom, even in a classroom. You can't smoke a cigarette in a classroom, you can't smoke a cigarette in the bathroom because it smells. These don't smell, and so they're super easy to conceal as well. So when you compare our toxic situation with intense marketing, the result is the vaping crisis. So in terms of statistics, 45% of sophomores in Pima County have currently tried vaping at least once. 115,000 kids in Arizona will die prematurely because of smoking-related illnesses. And 16.1% of high schoolers reportedly smoke, or vape, whereas only 7.1% of high schoolers report having smoked cigarettes, right? So people that aren't smoking cigarettes are vaping, and that's a really alarming issue. And then nationwide, as I said, the national vaping rates increased by 78% in high school and 45% in middle school. The Center for Disease Control estimated that 38% of high schoolers and 13% of middle schoolers have tried vaping at least once. And within the main argument for changing policy is that people between ages 18 and 21 in the Army wouldn't be able to smoke, right? So I did the math. And in the U.S., there's about 730,000 people enrolled in the armed services under the age of 24. Within 1 year, there will be 100,000 more middle schoolers vaping than those people in the armed services, and there will be 7 times as many high schoolers vaping than those people in the armed services. So when you look at why that age number is increased, it's really not a justifiable issue. So now that we're kind of aware of the actual statistics that this crisis is in fact real, let's look at the consequences of vaping. So first, it damages your teeth. It erodes them, it turns them yellow, your teeth start to erode. It also has terrible effects on your lungs. So part of that is popcorn lung. Does anybody know what popcorn lung is? Right, so it's when you smoke, it's the flavors in the e-cigarettes that then travel through your trachea, and they get stuck in the bronchus, and they start to cut away and inflame the bronchus, which makes it hard to breathe, and that's why people develop that smoker's cough. Also, one of the ingredients in vape is propylene glycol, which is also used to fabricate clothes, and it's also used in antifreeze, and it's not meant to be ingested, right? It's in a liquid form, but because of vaping, the way it works is it heats that liquid up into a vapor, and then you can ingest it, right? So you ingest that propylene glycol, it goes in through your mouth, and it gets stuck in your lungs, and since it's fat, it just kind of sits there. And eventually that fat starts to build, it starts to line your lungs in a layer of fat, and that's why, it's all over the news, right? 6 people now have died because of vaping, and 450 other people across 33 states are in the hospital for pneumonia-like symptoms, with many of them in critical condition. So there are real effects to vaping, not just in the long term with death, but also in the short term with teeth, making it harder to breathe, stuff like that. It's also, as I said earlier, a bit of a gateway drug in the sense that people that aren't smoking cigarettes are vaping, right? Traditionally, middle schoolers have never smoked cigarettes. Those numbers haven't been that high, but now middle schoolers are vaping. Almost none of us smoke cigarettes. It's also, as I said earlier in the Kahoot, right, there's that picture of the thing that looks like a jewel that's actually a packed arrow, which dispenses marijuana. So for many people, they start out vaping nicotine, and once you get accustomed to that, they move to marijuana. So it's quickly becoming not just a vaping epidemic for nicotine, but for marijuana as any idea why there's a dog in this presentation? How vaping could negatively affect their dog? Secondhand? Yeah, that's a good guess, and that's partly true, right? So secondhand smoke is when, everybody know what secondhand smoke is? Yeah, so that's actually called thirdhand smoke, which is when you vape, as the active smoker blows out the smoke, that residue just doesn't go away, right? It's thick, it's cloudy, and it settles on whatever surface is, right? So if you're vaping over the floor and, you know, the smoke goes down, it's on the floor, then when your dog lies on the floor, all those carcinogens, all those cancer-containing carcinogens and negative effects are going to apply to the dog. So it turns out that dogs whose owners who smoke are twice as likely to die from cancer. So vaping doesn't just affect you, it affects your family, infants, any other people who are vulnerable to secondhand smoke and thirdhand smoke. So people are putting their entire families at risk as well. So this is great, right? We understand, this isn't great, I didn't mean that. So we understand kind of how addiction works, right? We understand why we as a youth turn to vapes because we're super vulnerable, we're super susceptible. So now what can you do to prevent and overcome addiction? So again, we're going to turn to the 4 drivers of addiction. And first is the environment. So when you're thinking of helping someone overcome addiction or preventing an addiction for that matter, what you have to do is think of Rat Park again. How can I turn an isolated cage into a happy and healthy heaven? And so you can find healthy alternatives to coping with stress, to coping with trauma, right? So name a couple, just mindfulness. Being aware of a negative situation can drastically impact and help improve a bad situation. And remember that percentage of people, so depression is greatly reduced by physical exercise, which is a great way to get in touch with your emotions, to overcome negative emotions, and to even make friends, create new connections, reduce isolation. And so that's very important in overcoming addiction, is creating a healthy and happy environment. So the next one is increasing human connection, right? Remember how susceptible we are to social media, how that's actually worsening the situation for us. And figure out, okay, does my kid have friends? And if not, why is that? What can be done? How can I put them in situations that will allow them to develop more friendships? And so great places, as I said earlier, one is exercise. At TGS, we have a great opportunity. Sports are no cut. Anybody can join. I've swam this year and I've never swam before in my life. And I've made friends. It's been a good way to be physical, be active, and make friends at the same time. And another is clubs, right? Clubs, anybody can join. We have a ton of them at TGS. And it's a great way to get involved, to be motivated about something, and again, to make friends. And so also educating them on the negatives of social media. You don't necessarily have to make them delete social media, but just they're aware that they should be friends with people in real life, not just on Snapchat, on Instagram, on other social medias. Whether you want to set time limits, however you want to do it is up to you. It's just so that they're aware that social media does not represent friendships and connection. So the third is addressing trauma and stress. So there's an Arizona Smokers Helpline, which I'll share that number with you guys at the end. But that's a free resource for any Arizona resident. There's a number and there's a website, and you get assigned a counselor, and I think they call it a quick coach, and they help you guide you through that process of overcoming nicotine addiction. And so you can't be afraid to get help. You have to ignore the stigma, ignore the pride factor. And for us, we're traumatized, right? We deserve help. And so even just allowing us, whether it be with the Arizona Smokers Helpline, with the trained psychiatrist, whatever it is, addressing the trauma and stress is going to reduce the addiction. And so lastly, increasing support and fighting the change policy. And then at the very end, I will talk about, I have it on the website, and it's a little easier to describe. So remember now that addictions are driven by unbearable living conditions, not by the drugs themselves. So in the same way, addictions are overcome by improving living conditions and sources of stress and depression, not with prescription drugs. Right? So in order to overcome an addiction, so I'll use myself as an example. I've always suffered from anxiety. That's just the way it is for me. And that actually resulted in a nicotine addiction. My sophomore year, I grew heavily dependent on nicotine, and that quickly led to vaping marijuana. But how I overcame my addiction was by overcoming my anxiety, like the underlying factors that led to the addiction, not just by prescribing myself with an anxiety medication. So I developed a passion for tennis. Through my internship, I've become connected. I've made more friends. I've deleted social media, and I've worked to create that happy and healthy environment instead of just relying on a prescription drug. And so there's 3 take-homes from this presentation. And the first is, remember that it's not our fault. We're overall susceptible and we're overall vulnerable. So you have to be positive no matter what, right? It's not our fault. And the second is, drugs do not drive addiction, right? Remember the 4 drivers of addiction. It's not those chemicals and nicotine driving the addiction, it's our susceptibility, and it's the factors and trauma that have factored in to us becoming susceptible. And lastly, don't be afraid to get help. Ignore the stigma, and ignore the pride factor, because we as youth deserve that help. So a couple quotes to end it. 3 factors need to coincide for substance addiction to occur: a susceptible organism, a drug with addictive potential, and stress, right? So it's not just that drug, it's those 3 factors, and the 4 true drivers of addiction. And so lastly, to kind of sum up the whole presentation, there's a quote by Johann Hari that says, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, the opposite of addiction is connection. And so if everybody could take out their phones or write this website down, it'll be a good way. Or can you go back, Philip, 1 second so they can write that website down? To that presentation, sorry, so they can write the URL. Alright, so if you either take a picture or whatever, or write that down, because that will be a good website. And I'll run through the website after. Everybody got it? Or? Alright, so now Philip, we can go back to the actual website. Thank you. So this is just a little brief website I created so that I can put all that information and those resources down, so you wouldn't have to write them all down. So first, if you have any questions as you're scrolling through the website, there's a little form you can fill out. You put your name and your email, and then you write the question, and that'll get sent to me. So there's that. And now if we scroll up, there's Tobacco 21. You could click on that. So if you scroll down a little bit, earlier I was saying that we need your help, right? So there's actually, in Tucson, we're voting to increase the minimum sales age for nicotine and tobacco products from 18 to 21. Excuse me. And that will occur on September 17th, which is next Tuesday at 9 a.m. I have the address link, and I have when it is and what the actual proposition includes. And so as youth, we greatly appreciate it. I get that a lot of you probably can't make it because of work and other commitments, but even if you know someone who can make it, we need your help in passing this amendment. So anybody from the public can speak for up to 3 minutes, and it can be as short as, hi, my name is blank, and I support this motion, or you can tell a story and demand change. And so the next part of the website are resources. So I've linked the 3 resources. Oh, yep, go ahead.
Was there any way to get feedback to the board of supervisors, like by texting or email or writing, as opposed to showing up?
No, they're not. Actually, my internship person, Lee, do you know the answer to that?
There's an online form at the health department, so if you go to the health department page, there should be an online form.
Tucson or state of Arizona Health?
For the Pima County.
Pima County.
Yes. City of Tucson, it would probably be an email directly to one of the council members. I know council Councilman Durham's pretty much been one of the leads for this initiative. But I can send some additional information to you, Stryder.
Yeah, and I can put that on the website in
Right,
that
a link
section.
to the feedback form.
Just to add to that, Councilman Paul Durham, he's in support of this, he's been saying his recommendation is to put the American Cancer Society in it. Please take a look at it. Was to go to Pima County Board of Supervisors Sharon Bronson and to email her to let her know that you're in support of this. So that was, again, from Councilman Paul Durham, Women's Cancer Society. Trying to get support for that. So he recommended emailing her, calling her.
So here's the actual, Ashline, here's the actual number and the website. So when you go to the website, those numbers, or even if you just type in Google AZ Ashline, it'll pop up. The other is two websites from the Pima County Health Department. One is pima.gov/real deal, and the other is pima.gov/tobacco-free. And those both link to the Pima County's website, and they have other presentations and a lot more education, pictures, stuff like that. The third part of the website is education. So I've linked 5 great resources if you're curious more about addiction, stuff like that in general. So one's a short TED Talk by international author Johan Hari. And it talks about kind of the idea of connection and how it plays into addiction. In short, it's just 15 minutes. It's worth a watch, and that's linked there. The second are 2 books by Johan Hari. The first is about drug policy and drug reform and how that can help the situation overall, not just the vaping crisis, but overall drug reform in the U.S. The second one is called Lost Connections, and that dives deeper into depression and how depression might not be necessarily caused by changing chemicals in our brains, rather the environment again. So that's a really phenomenal book. The fourth is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts by Gabor Mate. And that talks about his up-close encounters with addiction. And he's a psychologist at a legal injection site in Canada where those are illegal. And the last is a special time edition, Mental Health, A New Understanding. And so all those are linked. There's an Amazon link or Barnes & Noble link or the YouTube link to either buy them or watch them. And so the last tab is just the presentation itself. So if you want to look at my speaker notes, they're linked, and the actual presentation is linked here. And so that's it. Thanks for coming. And if you have any questions, anything like that. Yes.
When marijuana is vaped, is it smelled? If not, why not?
Yeah, so in terms of actually technically why not, I'm not sure. But it depends on the quality. So a lot of them are from, let's see, how do I phrase it? So some of them are higher quality, some of them are lower quality, some are straight from the dispensary, and some are off the street, right? So the ones that tend to be from the dispensary itself tend not to smell as much because they're a lot higher quality. The ones off the street tend to smell a lot more. So some can be super pungent and they smell as strongly as, the flower, the bud itself. And some don't smell at all. So it really just depends on the quality of the cartridge. Yeah.
Are there scenarios where what you think you're getting is also laced with something else?
Big time. So at least for the THC cards, and THC is the active component in weed that kind of gives people the brain high. So in those carts off the street, they're laced with pesticides, I believe. And they're also something called vitamin E is in them, which again is a fat, and again goes into your lungs, and the fat kind of stays in your lungs. So they are, especially the ones off the street, can be laced just like any drug off the street. You have no idea what's in it. But in terms of the dispensary ones, most likely not. And in terms of nicotine itself, that tends to be less. It tends to be more regulated as opposed to buying nicotine off the street. You might get it off the street from a friend, but it's in a package, something like that. So those tend to be less contaminated than marijuana. So any other questions? All right, thank you again for coming.